Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. We're here at the ADSA scientific meetings in Ottawa, Canada this week, and we've been having conversations with students all week about the abstracts that they've submitted. Now, this is part two of two parts. So if you've missed part one, please go back and listen to that. My co-host for this session is going to be Dr. Pete Morrow. He's a tech service representative for Balchem. And my guest today is Dr. Heather White and Dr. Billy Brown. Heather, you really need no introduction, but if you wouldn't mind, give an introduction to our audience, and then also tell us a little bit about Billy. How'd you get to know him and some of the work that he's done for you?
Yeah, great. Thank you, first of all, for having us here and for your interest in the research. I'm Heather White. I am faculty at University of Wisconsin-Madison in the area of nutritional physiology, so I'm a professor there. Just hit my 10-year mark earlier this year, so that's good. Do teaching and research there and serve as the faculty director for the Dairy Innovation Hub. So as a part of my research program, always looking for great additions to the lab, grad students, postdocs. Billy joined the lab and bravely joined without ever having met any of us in person, thanks to COVID. So Billy and I met by Zoom, and we just had a lot of trust in the situation there. He may or may not tell you that was well-placed trust, but he came to Wisconsin and jumped right into a cow study. It was, in fact, the cow study that yielded the calves we'll be talking about today. So he spent about 1.5 years with us in Wisconsin and is now faculty at Kansas State. So let him tell you a little bit more about himself.
Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
I was really grateful that they weren't all holograms. They were real when I moved to Wisconsin, but no, I'm a faculty member at Kansas State University. I'm primarily teaching, 60% teaching, but do have a research appointment, so we're trying to get that off the ground, launching that now. And we'll be starting a calf starter grain study with my first grad student here in a couple of weeks, so we're excited about that.
All right, very well. Hey, would you mind giving us then an overview of the abstract that was presented here? Was it a presentation or a poster?
A poster.
It was a poster, yeah.
Okay.
So we're really excited about those results, but and we've had a number of abstracts that have resulted of that. But to kind of give you some cliff notes, we fed several varieties of choline, the traditional reassure, and then a prototype of that, more concentrated prototype, to prepartum dairy cows for 3 weeks prepartum, and then we took the resulting calves from those cows and tracked them through a period of time. And specifically for this poster that we're talking about, we were looking at Holstein and Angus cross calves. And so we tracked their growth for a number of months, and then we fed them a finishing diet, and then we took them to slaughter and looked at carcass characteristics of those animals and how that changed their carcass overall. So really the first of its kind research in this area, and we're really excited to be able to be a part of it.
Okay. Just to kind of summarize, so these animals the mothers were fed the choline,
Yep.
prepartum, and then the calves then no
Yeah,
choline, or what was the?
They all had a standard diet. They were raised similarly, so all the treatments were really based upon the dam feeding while those calves were in utero.
So this
epigenetic thing, this concept developmental programming, which is starting to gain more traction, and we really have the perfect environment with the dairy industry to really isolate these gestational effects of the things that we can do through nutrition or management. And really isolate those compared to other species, because we do raise those calves on a bottle in a very homogeneous way throughout the rest of their lifespan. So a great model that we can leverage.
I'm kind of curious, did you have a hypothesis ahead of time of what kind of results you would see, or were you just kind of going into it to see what you would see?
Well, one of the things that we did know was looking at some past literature from Florida, we had a good hunch that calves might have a little bit of a growth advantage. And we did see that in the first 10 months where there was some growth advantage. But other than that, we didn't really know what we were going to see. And so one of the big things that we did note, I'll go ahead and jump into some of those results if that's okay, is that at the time of harvest, at least, it didn't appear that there was any change or evidence of difference in the weight of those calves or the ribeye area, but we were seeing some differences in what appears to be fat metabolism. So they had greater kidney, pelvic, and heart fat, but they also had greater marbling. And that's the part that really excites us, because there's very few ways to influence that marbling outside of genetics or just feeding them a higher energy diet, right? We know that Wagyu and Angus are great at marbling, but nutritionally speaking, that's a little bit tougher nut to crack. And so we did see an increase there, and I think that had some pretty big implications long term for the beef and dairy industries when we talk about beef and dairy animals.
Heather, I'm just kind of curious if you've got a hypothesis as to what the mode of action might be.
Yeah, so we measured quite a few metabolites along the way. So Billy talked about the carcass quality and carcass characteristics. But we also took blood samples and we found some differences or tendencies for differences in things like insulin and glucose. And so when we're thinking about that, marbling plays into that. And like Billy said, we think this is probably related to glucose and lipid metabolism. That doesn't surprise us if we think about what we've seen in the lactating dairy cow, pre and postpartum, and when we think about some of the cell culture work we've done to look at the mechanism of action. When we supplement cells with choline or in vivo, we tend to see changes and differences in glucose metabolism and lipid metabolism that support milk production through increased gluconeogenesis, increased oxidative capacity, increased VLDL export. So it wouldn't be surprising to think that that could be a hypothesis for mechanism here. We talked about epigenetics earlier. We were also really interested to see if methylation patterns had changed, because that's, with choline being a methyl donor, that's also something that we would suspect. We looked at global methylation patterns in blood samples, so not targeted, not single gene up or down regulation, just global methylation patterns. And we did observe an increase for that in the male offspring. We did not observe a difference in female offspring of either the Holstein or the beef cross. Now, at first that's a little surprising because we saw changes in growth across all of the offspring, but we have to remember, first of all, that there were a lot of metabolic changes as well and metabolites that were changed, so there's probably more than one mechanism of action here. But also we know that across species, rodent models, sheep, humans, that the male offsprings are more likely to have increased global methylation and be able to detect that. The females are much harder to detect the difference in methylation pattern, even if there's a difference in the growth outcome. So again, this is consistent with that across the board. So at this point, I think there's probably a little bit of both of those, both through methylation pattern changes, and we should definitely dive into those more in the future, and then maybe directly through changing glucose or lipid metabolism pathways.
Do you think you'd see similar results from feeding choline to finishing cattle, or is it just an epigenetic response?
Yeah, I mean, that's a little bit of a tough one to guess, right? Because we probably have the opportunity for a big impact through the fetal programming. Like Billy mentioned earlier, that's an opportunity for us to impact the animal when it is both going through a big growth phase in utero, but also setting kind of the stage for lifelong growth and metabolism. And so if we have an effect there with something, we don't always see the same effect, depending on what nutrient we're talking about, later by feeding it directly. But to my knowledge, we haven't fed, or at least in the published literature, you know, maybe there's some stuff hiding we can dig out, but in the published literature, there's not cases where we fed choline in the finishing stage in controlled randomized studies. So we either need to go back and see if we've done that in the past, maybe in beef animals, and we can look at it again here in the future. So I think it's probably worth exploring.
Yeah, thinking about a future, so I guess there's a lot more things to understand. What does the next step in research look like?
Yeah, well, I think the world is our oyster at this point. You know, these are exciting results, but they're, you know, in a way, fairly preliminary results too. So I think, you know, some of this is just maybe taking a different approach at it, maybe looking at a different stage or a different species, and trying to see if we can replicate this at least. And then I think diving into some specific tissues and understanding what's happening in those tissues metabolically, what's happening from DNA methylation standpoint, and trying to get a better picture and digging down deeper into those a little bit better. So it's one of those situations where there's so many different avenues you can start with. Where do you start to narrow it down a little bit?
Yeah.
So.
I think if I can add to that, one thing to point out is that this is a fairly small sample set. By the time we break it down, we had 4 maternal treatment groups. Each of those, so even though there was 24 cows in each treatment, which is powered for that, then we have offspring. Half of those are Holstein heifers, half are beef cross, half of those were female and half were male. So by the time we get to those final carcass characteristics, Some of the treatment groups maybe had 12 animals in those groups, right? So first and foremost, we've got to recognize that this needs to be repeated. Just like Billy said, we need to make sure that this can be replicated across and that we observe the same thing. But I think that goes back to the original reason why we did this. So the beef cross animals following to slaughter was never a part of the original experimental design. In fact, we were only ever planning to follow all animals to weaning. But one thing for me is that it was really full circle. My master's is I had a meat science component and lipid metabolism component, spent a lot of time looking at both swine and beef carcasses. And we saw that out in the real world, people are breeding these beef cross animals, and there's a complete dearth in benchmarks, right? There's not those average metrics for people to look at and say, okay, these beef cross animals are growing as we would expect. I'm meeting the benchmarks, I'm not, I'm average, I'm below, I'm above. And people really needed that data. And so we had an opportunity to do that. And for me, it was kind of full circle to go back to something I had looked at years ago. With Billy joining the lab and some background in beef and the ability to add capacity to the team, we were able to look at that. So a big part of it was just to add baseline data, right? To get some data in the literature and to start building that database on what's there. The fact that we observed differences in slaughter from a prepartum maternal treatment was really rather exciting to be able to see significant differences from something we never fed to the calves themselves. So that was really a pleasant surprise because we really were just looking for some baseline data. So first and foremost, I think we've got to make sure that this is repeatable across and then dig into it and see what kind of nutritional power is there, right?
Yeah, very exciting. You know, choline's one of those compounds, the more we learn about it, the more we learn that we don't know a lot about it. So there's a lot left to know. I really appreciate you guys stopping by and spending some time with us today. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Tonight's pubcast stories are brought to you by Reassure Precision Release Choline. Reassure is the most researched encapsulated choline on the market today, consistently delivering results to your transition cows of higher peak milk, reduced metabolic disorders, and even in utero benefits to her calf, leading to growth and health improvements. Visit Balchem.com to learn more.
Welcome back to the ADSA here in Ottawa. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Ryan Ordway. He's the Director of Strategic Accounts for Balchem. We also have a guest here, Sergio Martinez Monteagudo from New Mexico State. Was that close enough?
Close enough.
All right, good, good. Sergio, you were an invited speaker here. Can you give us a little bit of background on yourself and then talk a little bit about the presentation that you gave?
Okay, well, I'm originally from Mexico. I born and grew up in north part of Mexico, just right at the border between Mexico and Texas.
Okay.
Then I did graduate school in University of Alberta in Canada.
Okay.
And then I moved to Ohio State University.
So I also went to Ohio State University, graduated way before you did though.
Okay. So and then after that, I started my career as a faculty in South Dakota State University for 4 years in dairy manufacturing. And then I went to get a little bit closer to family. And then I saw the job description in New Mexico. And
Excellent.
since
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you.
I moved in the middle of the pandemic.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about, have you given the presentation yet?
Yes.
Yes, okay. What was that all about?
The presentation is, well, the name is upcycling. And in one way to look at it is upgrade and reuse, just not materials, but also services, with the idea would create a lot more sustainable industry.
Okay.
Now, the concept is not new. The concept has been for a while now. Where we play a lot in the literature is just coming with new terminologies, upcycling and valorization. But the concept is the same. It has been used in other fields as well. So how we can take something that is usually a waste, convert it into a valuable product. That's essentially the whole idea.
Okay.
And what I do for that is, what I focus on my research is, for instance, we take lactose, and nobody wants lactose anymore, and convert it into sweeteners.
Okay.
That you can use in beverage or other products. And they come entirely from lactose. That's one of the attractive parts of what I'm doing. And the whole principle is, the way I look at it is use chemical engineering principles to convert materials that will be a waste into upgrade and reuse.
Interesting. Yeah, so you mentioned lactose. just kind of off the subject, maybe it is on the subject since we are in a virtual pub, but they are turning lactose into alcohol in the form of vodka. There's a company here called Vodcow. And I also know that they put it into beers to kind of smooth it out and kind of create a different texture. So
Yeah, well, that product is pretty good.
that is pretty good.
It's pretty good. Yeah. But and that's the thing. If we all want it to be lactose free,
Yeah.
and then we focus on protein, we focus on fat, and the lactose is just getting accumulated and accumulated and accumulated because it's not going anywhere.
Right.
And we as an engineer also has a raw material. What is my raw material? Is milk. I cannot get milk without lactose coming out of the cow. So the moment we remove it with technology, is just surplus food.
Yeah.
And then we have to do something with that surplus. And in a similar way happened with the fat-free movement around in the 90s, that nobody wants fat, and then we have a lot of fat and we don't know what to do with that fat. It's similar in this sense with the lactose now. Maybe in the future we will have a surplus of protein. Who knows?
Yeah. Are there other byproducts other than lactose?
Yeah, I also focus on phospholipids
Okay.
and dairy phospholipids specifically, and the motivation behind that is the health benefits that are related with the consumption of phospholipids, specifically dairy phospholipids, because the distribution of those materials is different from the ones in plant. Now, the issue with the dairy industry, concentration is very small, and there's diluted streams. So usually it's a byproduct from buttermilk, from butter and similar products. So essentially it's a lot of water and a small amount of phospholipids. If you think about it, you have to remove all the water, you have to remove lactose, you have to remove several to get a small portion. So that is not really attractive in terms of large volumes. But part of the reason they're doing adaptive from material science is using different solvents that you can extract the phospholipids and also separate it, so you don't have to do multiple steps.
Interesting. Sorry, Ryan. I invited you here for a reason, so.
Well, no, I lead our sustainability program for our animal nutrition and health group, and I was at a pet sustainability conference a couple of weeks ago, and upcycling was the topic to discuss, because it's the same exact thing. In the rendering industry, meat processing, they have all these trim meats and all these hides and things that have been traditionally get thrown in landfills, and now they're looking for how can we change our process. It's really, as you said, it's really an engineering thing to overcome, and as we can utilize more of those, less goes into, not only does less go into the landfill, which is a cost, right, to the producer of the processor, but it's actually getting value added to it, and then being turned into companion animal treats and food and things like that. And I was thinking, as you were talking, that, when I was a real dairy nutritionist before I, retired from that to join Balchem. Scott, you're supposed to laugh at that comment, but I was dealing with whey all the time, right? And it was something that was just getting thrown away, and it was a byproduct. It was a waste product, and that was probably as I think back, that was probably one of the original upcycle products. And now, whey has more value for the most part than casein.
Or even cheese.
Yeah, exactly.
But at that time, we didn't know upcycling exists.
Right. Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. It's an old concept.
Yeah.
But the other part, if you look at the literature, what is scientific literature on upcycling, other fields are more progressive for several reasons. I took a look at the upcycling in construction, and it's a lot more sense grabbing a design a plastic that can actually couple like a Lego pieces and then build some materials and small houses and things like that, or even clothing is a lot easier. But when it comes to food, how are you going to design a food to be reused? That is hard to do in that way. So if well, for instance, IKEA designed wooden stools that after some time you can turn into a bike. Mm-hmm. But those are designed with that purpose.
Yes.
Now with a food, how are you going to design this vodka cow to reuse somewhere else? It's hard to do in that way.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the idea in other fields that design for second use is not applicable at this moment in food products. Now, you can take advantage of byproducts, waste, yes, yes, and using technology, but the idea just simply designing to be reused, that's a big challenge.
Yeah, interesting.
And you've got the shelf life stability issue as well, where
Safety issues.
plastics you don't have a problem, and it could be a regulatory challenge.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of other things that are coming into play with dairy products and really across all the animal ag space, byproducts that you're trying to upcycle.
And in general, any food material, even agricultural waste, it needs to be, if you're going to add it into food, you have to get rid of pathogens.
Yep. Right. Exactly.
Or even allergens.
Yep. So good question. Is turning waste oil from cooking, things like that, into biofuels, is that considered upcycling?
I would say yes.
Yeah, I would too.
Now, there are already some organizations that Upcycling Food Association, they have their own manifesto. I'll say manifesto because it is written in a way like, yeah, this is what I wanted to do in my life. But the issue to me is, as long you are helping not going into directly to landfill, that should be upcycling. Now the rules, those are just technicalities, that what flavor you like. But the moment you are extending the life of that product, that should be upcycled. Yeah. And that is directly related to sustainability. And that's another issue that we don't have. What is the right metric to see are we upcycling enough? Do we have enough metrics? Because normally when sustainability we come with carbon footprint, water footprint, energy use, so on and so on. So what about in this topic? I don't think we have metrics.
Yeah, I think the sky's the limit at this point. I agree. I don't think there are any metrics.
So we can create our own metrics of cycling.
Yep. And I mean, Scott leads our marketing. It really is marketing. I mean, it's a great story coming out of the dairy industry. That's continually seems to be under fire for
whatever reason.
For whatever reason, right? Methane, carbon emissions, you name it. And this is a really good story, because in the past, I mean, we talk about we use citrus waste and things like that, but there's not. That's done behind the scenes, right? We're feeding a cow or we're feeding a pig or something, the citrus, rinds, but it doesn't really get into the public. Where something like this, something like the, cow vodka, there's something you can get in front of the consumer, and it's a really great opportunity for us as an industry to sort of raise that awareness that, hey, we are doing our part. There's things, we have a long ways to go, but it's a great thing that we're trying to do for the the world.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing, for instance, is if you think about their industries under fire and all that, what would be this country without the dairy industry?
Right. I wouldn't have my belt.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have my shoes.
Yes. Jobs.
Jobs.
Taxes.
Exactly.
I mean, what is wrong in creating jobs and paying taxes?
Yeah.
Since when that was bad?
Yeah.
That sounds like a great place to stop, man. We need the dairy industry.
Yeah, we need it.
Yep. Sergio, this has been a fascinating topic, one that I think we could talk on for hours, especially with Ryan here. He's passionate about sustainability, upcycling, all of that. This has been a very interesting. Looking forward to your talk tomorrow. I'm going to attend, so thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. My
Very
pleasure.
welcome.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome back to the ADSA. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Jeff Elliott, along with Dr. Jim Drakely and Kelly Brost. Kind of the one neat thing that we were talking about early here is that Jeff was actually Dr. Drakely's very, very first grad student, and so far Kelly is the last. So we got the alpha and the omega going on here right now. So and all from the University of Illinois. Jim, what I'd like to do is to have you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself. You probably don't need an introduction, but there may be somebody out there that doesn't know your credentials.
Well, yeah, I've been at the University of Illinois for 34 years in research and teaching, and work in the areas of dry cow nutrition and management and baby calf nutrition.
And I think we were on a podcast, I don't think it's dropped yet, but somebody referred to you as one of the icons
Well,
in the industry.
Another word for old, I think.
Would you mind introducing your student for
I
us?
sure can. Yeah, Kelly Brost is a graduate student with me. She started out in a master's program, but now is working in a direct to PhD program and working in the area of calf nutrition.
So now are you giving a poster or a presentation?
This is a poster.
And it'll be
Tomorrow.
tomorrow,
Yep.
okay? And that's titled The Relationships Between Birth and Calving Season on First Lactation Performance of Holstein Dairy Cows in Midwestern U.S. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? How'd this project come about?
Sure. It actually developed from a project I had done last year, an analysis looking at average daily gain with calves and the season they were born in. And I wanted to take that a little bit further. So I did this analysis from data that our dairy had had, and I took it back to 2009. So we had about 13 years worth of cows, first lactation cows that were used. And
how many did that represent?
it was over 500,
Okay.
around 520.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was pulling out quite a few that we didn't have all of the data on. But we wanted to look at how those cows performed based on the season that they were born in. And then I went a little bit further and wanted to look at the season that they calved in, which can range a little bit depending on how old they were when they were bred, and look at basically their performance with milk components as far as percent fat, percent proteins, also how long they might have lasted, like their production life within the herd.
So just give us an overall view or summary of those results.
Sure.
And you've already explained to us you looked at it from a birth season and a calving season, and those differences were a little bit different.
Yes.
So kind of make sure you define each of those.
Overall, there was a correlation between both the first time lactation cows' calving season, their season of birth, as well as calving season. There were minor differences between the reproduction aspect and the milk component aspect, but again, that goes into that how they overlap somewhat, but can also be in different seasons. I think this could be applied towards looking at the management practices when cows experience both of these or either one during an extremely hot summer season.
And so most of the, let's say, detrimental effects were for those summer season.
For the summer season, even when we looked at summer versus all non-summer seasons, you could also see an impact on many of those areas. When we looked at winter versus summer or winter versus all non-winter seasons, we would see the exact opposite. So those winter cows might have better milk components. They might be staying in the herd longer, being bred fewer times. So it was just the opposite effect there.
Okay. And, we talked earlier, do you think there is a colostrum effect as well as a in utero effect? Meaning, are we seeing different quality colostrum in those summer season animals?
Sure. I did not personally look at that, but I have read about there being an effect. It seems like the more you layer on heat stress at different times, the harder it is for that cow to keep up. So there could definitely be a colostrum effect there.
Yeah. Jim, do you have any comments from the colostrum effect?
No, I think that's very possible, and it might be embedded in what Kelly's looking at. There are data to show that colostrum quality suffers during heat stress, so it's a possibility.
When we talk about quality, you're talking about just lower levels of IgG mostly?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
The other question I had real quick, I'm sorry, and so we talked about this is an in utero effect, or is this just an impact on the animal after birth?
This was an impact on the animal. I have read quite a few papers on in utero effect. I think it's very interesting, and I think it could also play into, again, those layers.
Right.
But I only looked at the effect on the animal. So whether it was the season that they were born in or the season that they first calved in.
Got it.
But we'd almost have to imply there's an in utero effect in that seasonal. they didn't look at that to see if there
Right.
were
Right,
differences, but
Right, it would have to be a part of it, or likely is a part of it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It'd be hard to separate it, I would
Right,
think.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question I've got, so let's assume there's some in utero effects or whatever's causing that. We observe those effects from management practice, we see nutrition practices, we know there's in utero effects there. So is environment, what we're talking about here, is that an additional potential cause, or is it part of management in the sense of heat stress? Because you mentioned heat stress several times.
Sure. I think you could really look at it either way, but I do think it all comes together because that animal, whether it's the calf or right before that dry cow before she calves in, the environment is playing a huge role. So whether it's even just in the Midwestern USA, or if it's a management practice where the animal's just not being cooled efficiently. So it could kind of go both ways. I think you really do need to look at the management for the
Right.
season. It just all
Yeah,
ties together.
Yeah, it does,
Yeah.
for sure.
And it's, if you think back farther, you know, if there's effects that occur during the first trimester, that puts it in a totally different season where you would have possible impacts on the very early development of the fetus.
Sure, yep. Does you looked at birth season, calving season.
Mhm.
Do you feel like those each stand alone, or are they related?
I do think they can be related just because the birth season, once the calving season comes around, it might line up towards that same season. Otherwise, I think that they could also stand alone if there's not as much impact in utero or in calving season that might be applied, that heat stress that's happening right before the cow's giving birth. If we didn't look at them that in depth for me to tell you which one, it just seemed to line up to where the seasons, the way they flowed and the way the results came out, that summer was the big hitter there.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Kelly, I understand you just started your PhD program, so you've got some studies ahead of you. What do you plan on looking at in the future? Perhaps I should ask that of Jim. What's the research look like going forward?
We actually have 2 trials lined up that are kind of flowing into one another. The first one looking at vitamin B complex in a milk replacer. And following that, in the post-weaning part, we're going to be looking at the use of plasma proteins in calf grower.
Oh, very interesting. Well, listen, I appreciate you guys joining us here today. This has been a lot of fun. Wish the best with your future education and then whatever you decide to do after that.
Thank you.
Welcome back to the ADSA Scientific Sessions. I'm here with my co-hosts, Dr. Pete Morrow and Dr. Jeff Elliott. Also, our guest is Jair Perales Giron. This is your second trip to the Real Science Exchange. Thank you very much for coming back for us again. Yeah.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Okay.
no worries. So listen, you gave a, have you given your presentation yet? Or, yeah.
I gave my presentation
Yes.
yesterday
So
afternoon.
can you kind of give us an overview of the objective of that presentation or the trial that led to the presentation? Sure.
So we were focused on checking if there could be any interactions between starch content of the diet and fatty acid supplementation in early lactation cows. So we used 2 different starch content, 22% as a low starch content and 28% as a high starch content, using dry ground corn for playing with the starch content of the diet. And we fed a 70-20 fatty acid supplement, 70% palmitic acid and 20% oleic acid at 2% of the diet dry matter. And we did different treatments. We did like the low starch, no fat, high starch, no fat, low starch plus fat, and higher starch plus fat. So those were our 4 treatments.
So what was the hypothesis? What led you to believe that there might be an interaction between starch and the fatty acids?
Our idea was checking those possible interactions, and we were trying to prove the hypothesis that fatty acid supplementation will increase or would increase the yields of fat at meal in the low starch diet, because that diet was like had a lower energy content, energy level. And on the other side, that the fatty acid supplementation would increase the energy partition into body energy reserves in the high starch diet because of the high energy content of that diet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you see that?
We did see the effect in the low starch diet, but in the highest starch diet, it's like we didn't see any effects on body weight. But also those results are in line with some previous results that we have shown from our lab using that 70-20 fatty acid supplement compared to control diets, because Jonas de Souza and Dr. Locke, they did a study checking the effect of different inclusion levels of oleic acid in a fatty acid blend. They checked the 80-10 palmitic oleic, 70-20, and 60-30. They found that increasing the oleic acid in that blend has a linear effect in decreasing body weight loss during that period. But if you see the means from the control treatment and the 70-20, they were the lines and how the variable behave in those two treatments were pretty close.
So do you have a hypothesis on your results where you saw the tendency for the fat to increase milk in the low starch, but no effect on the high starch?
Our idea it was that probably there could be an increase in energy partitioning, or probably in our case there was no effect of the treatments on body weight loss, and that coincides with some things that we have seen before as well. So always we are trying to say, okay, probably there could be an additive effect, and both treatments, I don't know, both inclusions could, I don't know, improve potentially the animal response. But in our case was like, okay, we didn't see any effect on body weight loss, and I think that's something that is positive as well.
Hey, real quick, I did you a disservice. I failed to mention that you are from Michigan State University, working out of Adam Locke's lab. So I wanted to make sure I got that in there. My apologies.
No, it's okay. Go green or white.
Exactly.
Can you comment about the high levels of really milk fat percent in these cows?
Yeah.
It was almost shocking when you read the abstract.
It's shocking, but actually in MSU we've been working a lot on doing genetic selection and improving our herd. And those are the results that from that kind of work that we've been doing as well. Yeah. Also, yes, our diets, and that's something that our farm manager is always happy when we are gonna do a study in transition cows, because always our diets are rocking compared to the diets that they usually use, even our control diets. So yeah, but that's the result of the selection that we've been doing, and also the help of our nutritionists as well. So we've been doing the work together, not only genetics, but also nutrition.
Yeah. So Scott, you may not have seen it, but I think the milk fat was 4.6%, 4.7%.
Yes.
So they were extremely high.
Yes.
And had high proteins. Your proteins were 3.3 plus.
Protein levels, yes, those were high. But also those results are consistent with the results that I have been seeing in all my studies, because I am focused on transition studies. And I did a previous study checking chromium supplementation and fat supplementation, and the levels, the protein levels and the fat levels, similar levels. So it's consistent.
Were you surprised that the starch level, the higher starch level, didn't affect milk protein more? It said there was no difference in milk protein.
Yeah, no protein, and actually there is a tendency to reduce the protein content with the starch, the high starch diet, and we think that is just a dilution effect, because main effect of starch was in favor of increasing milk yield.
Okay.
So I've got to ask, we talked earlier before we sit down, but you said you got this question yesterday as well. The starch content of your close-up ration.
Yeah, we try to keep that thing as low as possible. So it was ranging between 18 and 19%.
18 and 19?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you think there's any effect going from a 18 to a 22% starch ration and an 18 to a 28 was your other starch? Was there any interaction there?
I think that there probably could be an effect, but unfortunately, I don't recall studies doing like that kind of arrangement of treatments foreseeing the timing of supplementation of high starch and low starch. But also you want to keep low starch as low as possible during the close-up period, you know, because everything related to the hepatic oxidation theory, if you're gonna have higher starch, you could increase propionate, and you could decrease dry matter intake, and that's something that we don't wanna have during that period. So yeah, so I think we play safe. Because we were having cows that would be eating a high amount of starch during the treatment period, so it was playing safe for avoiding any confusion effects as well.
When you're enrolling these cows, do you get a say over what this transition diet is, or is kind of the standard MSU diet until they freshen?
Yeah, usually we do some tweaks. We ask to our nutritionist, okay, what are you doing right now? So, okay, if we've been seeing that historically there is something that is not working correctly with the close-up diet, if we need to, I don't know, decrease phosphorus, increase the DCAT or something like that, that's the time that we do the adjustments. And usually when do those adjustments, the farm keeps using our adjustments for the close-up diet. Yeah.
So my last question, I'm going out to a dairy tomorrow, let's say it's 5,000 cows, and they want to know, what's the guideline on starch and fat in those fresh cows? Where do I need to be?
Yeah, I guess the most important result is the interaction, and seeing that fat is having different effects in a low starch and in a high starch diet. So if you are not able to have, I don't know, too much energy or high in a low starch diet, yes, fatty acid supplementation could work for you because it was an increase in fat yield, and yes, we had a tendency for increasing energy corrected milk, but also it's because having a 2x2 factorial is bringing more noise, and probably that result that was a tendency just having two treatments could be significant, you know. So in a low starch diet, I would say yes, use fat. In a high starch diet, I would say you need to check the fatty acid profile as well of the supplement that you'll be using. We did use a 70-20, so we had oleic, and calcium salts are not complete rumen protected, so you are going to have some degradation, some liberation of the fatty acids, and we know that unsaturated fatty acids could have some effect on rumen fermentation parameters. So you need to exert or be careful with your choices. So yeah, if you have high starch, keep working with the high starch, because we saw a main effect of high starch. But if you are in some circumstances that you don't have the opportunity to have high starch, fatty acid supplementation could be a tool for increasing energy corrected milk.
Here, thank you for joining us once again. This is your second trip here, as we mentioned before. So what are you working on now, and what kind of a preview can you give us for next year?
I just finished my third study, part of my dissertation. We were checking whole cotton seed inclusion and fatty acid supplementation, because everything in my dissertation is based on transition cows. So my first study was checking chromium and fatty acid supplementation and seeing if there would be possible interactions. My second study is the one that I just talked, the starch and fatty acid supplementation. This one was like two different ways for feeding fat and see if there is an interaction there. And the upcoming study, I think, is the most ambitious one because we'll be checking essential amino acids and 3 different inclusion levels of fatty acids.
Good.
So it's gonna be a big one. So yeah, I am excited.
I'll be looking forward to it.
Yeah, and probably next year I'll be here again.
All right, thank you.
Talking to you guys.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
And welcome back to the ADSA Scientific Sessions. I'm here with my co-host, Dr. Marcos Zanobi. Welcome back, Marcos. We also have guest Dr. Erickson from University of New Hampshire and his student, Tess Stahl. So, and going to be in 3 weeks going for a PhD. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
All right. Listen, Dr. Erickson, would you start us off, just kind of give us some background on yourself and who you are and what you guys are about?
Okay, so I've been a professor at UNH for 26 years, going on 26 years, professor of dairy management, extension dairy specialist. A lot of research has been in the area of calf and heifer, and now we're getting into the transition cow work. So Tess came on board back for her master's back in 2017, and then worked with heifers there, and then we decided to go into the transition cow work, primarily with Jerseys, because Jerseys have some issues with colostrum, and that's really where we were going to evaluate with this in this experiment. So,
Are you a born and bred New Englander?
I most certainly am.
Yeah.
You probably can tell by my accent.
A little bit, yeah.
So.
Exactly. Would you mind telling us just a little bit about Tess?
So Tess came to us from Delaware Valley University.
Yeah.
Did her master's with me studying sodium butyrate in post-wean heifers, did a large 12-week study, decided to stay on for her doctorate, which this research was actually done during COVID, which made it another challenge for us. So we have 2 herds at UNH. We have a Holstein herd and a Jersey herd, and this was primarily done with Jerseys. Tess will be leaving us for a faculty position in a couple months. So,
Oh, and you know where already, I guess.
Yes.
Can you tell us that?
Rutgers.
Oh, cool.
So-
Excellent. Another Big Ten school. I like
Yes.
that.
congratulations.
Thank you.
Tess, why don't you, by the way, I was going to tell you, I spent some time in Bucks County, lived there for a while, and down in Newtown, so that's not all that far from Delaware Valley.
No, it's
Yeah.
a beautiful area.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you mind giving us kind of the hypothesis and objective of the study that we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. So Pete and I had talked about investigating this issue with colostrum yield in Jerseys based on a paper that came out in JDS in 2018. The author is Gavin, and it came out of Washington State Vet School. But the cows were in Texas, and they did this very large trial. They looked at both primiparous and multiparous cows, and a lot of factors that are influencing colostrum yield. And they had observed that a lot of the multiparous cows produced very low amounts of colostrum. They did see a seasonal effect of it, so primarily happening in the late fall and winter, and then picking back up again in the spring. So they really weren't sure what was happening with it. They had hypothesized photoperiod, but they really weren't solid on anything else other than that. So he and I had talked about, I had read in an endocrinology journal about the connection between hypocalcemia and the mammary epithelial cells and their ability to bring calcium into the mammary gland, and how it's connected to the osmolality. And so if there's low calcium, there's low yield, so not as much water coming in. And so we kind of thought maybe the DCAD diet would help. And there's really been no research evaluating levels of DCAD in Jerseys, what would be appropriate for them. So we wanted to make those connections between, can we really hone in on a level of DCAD that would work for Jerseys and help improve the yield. And the nicotinic acid part of the trial was due to work from UNH with Holsteins that saw 32 grams a day resulted in the best response for both the cows and the calves. they saw an increase in purine derivatives, so they thought microbial protein synthesis. Nicotinic acid is a known vasodilator, so more blood flow, more amino acid flow to the mammary gland, and they saw an increase in IgG concentration on that trial. So
is nicotinic acid also anti-lipolytic?
yes.
I know niacin is, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another term for niacin.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, so
I
it's
thought
a-
maybe they were a little different. No.
No, it's just the unprotected
Okay, got it.
niacin.
So more of a rumen effect?
Yes, yeah, so a ruminal effect, exactly. And then they saw that the calves were more feed efficient in the first 3 weeks of life. So something was improved with niacin supplementation that resulted in small intestine development in the calves, which was some pretty cool stuff. So we wanted to do both. Can we improve both colostrum quality and quantity? And we took the 32 and edited it for the metabolic body size of jerseys. So we wound up at 23 grams a day of nicotinic acid. And then I took the -80 DCAD, which is deemed optimal for Holsteins, and cut it in half. No real science, just wanted to see if going something more towards 0 would be better for the Jersey breed. And that's what we had hoped would happen. Yeah, we would hope that we'd get the improvement in yield and quality.
So it's pretty nice, the design that you have. It's pretty interesting. So especially when you talk about niacin and the role in rumen, because usually we focus more on the anti-lipolytic effect. But getting into the results, I think that you saw some anti-lipolytic results.
Did we see
less fat and
Yes.
more protein?
Yes,
in the
Yeah.
colostrum?
Yep.
yes.
So maybe we can go into the results and see your hypothesis behind the results.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the first things that we did with the calves on day 5 of life was we did a xylose challenge. So to explain it a little bit, you supplement D-xylose. You take a blood sample before the supplementation, and then you put the D-xylose in their morning milk, mix it in, remove their grain for the day, and take blood samples every few hours until 12 hours. And we had seen the increase in circulating xylose concentration in the calves that came from nicotinic acid supplemented cows, which was pretty cool. And so now that was verifying that feed efficiency in the first 3 weeks that was seen with the Holstein calves.
Kind of repeating the results.
Yes, yep, just
nice.
wanted to see, was it true, basically. And then since we had observed the problem with yield, as everyone else has seen too with jerseys, and we had to put a minimum for colostrum. So calves received a minimum of 2 liters to enroll of maternal colostrum, and up to 1 gallon, and anything in between those 2 numbers. And we had to set that baseline because 10 cows produced less than 2 liters, so not enough to even feed the calf.
And was that based on trying to get a certain amount of IgG into them? And if so, what was that amount?
It was just just enough to meet the baseline that they would need to meet the passive of transfer immunity.
Yeah, so we tried, standard operating procedures are give them 4 liters, give them 1 gallon approximately. And we basically had to go and say, all right, we had to have a cutoff somewhere because they had to get some. And one of our cows produced 0 colostrum. So it was a bit of a challenge. So, and this is an ongoing problem.
And we had, because of the results with the calves in the Holsteins, we had looked at a lot of the bioactive compounds that affect calf intestinal development. So lactoferrin, IGF-1, insulin, and transforming growth factor, beta-1 and 2, just to see what did niacin do, what was improved. And so we really didn't see much difference in concentration, but we saw that there was a greater amount of lactoferrin fed to calves that came from nicotinic acid supplemented cows.
Could you please give us more background about that bioactive?
Sure. So lactoferrin is causing cell proliferation. And so it's creating a more developed intestine, more absorptive cells, and so things can absorb faster in theory, and they would become more efficient, or you hope. And So that lactoferrin, and then with IGF-1, kind of a similar mechanism of action. We saw an interaction effect with the -40 with nicotinic acid cows providing the most IGF-1 to calves. And the -80 with was still pretty high. The interaction was at the -40 with. So 2 things that help with calf intestinal development. So we saw that data, we were really excited, and then we hypothesized, okay, well that means they're going to be more feed efficient then. And we did not see the result in feed efficiency. So the -40 calves without and with nicotinic acid or niacin were equally as feed efficient. And then there was a decrease with the -80. So the only thing I can gather is that the -80 is too harsh of a DCAD, and we're kind of seeing some, not as bad, but some similar effects from when you feed a -180 milliequivalent per kilogram dry matter in Holsteins. They saw a lot of fetal programming, and so there might be something happening with that that's negating any benefits we're seeing in the intestinal development.
Okay, and in the field in general, what is the recommended dose of DCAD for jerseys?
Well, there is none. There is none. So we're going to say based on her data -40.
Okay.
But hopefully someone looks into it further, because I wouldn't even say the 40 was the best.
Okay.
So.
Is that in the plan for the future?
Well, so right now we're going to continue on with a similar study, looking at various amounts. 23 grams appears to be a little too high. So the next study will be 0, 8, and 16 grams to see if we can figure out. That study's due to get going in the fall.
Okay. And always unprotected.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we've been using. So.
Yeah, when they did the Holstein work, they did incremental dosing, and the 48 grams was too much, and we saw some similar results with the 23 in jerseys. So that's why I hypothesized it probably was a little bit too much for the jerseys.
Yeah. So I read the abstract, and it's pretty complete, and you talk about some fatty acids, specific 16, 19. Can you expand a little bit on that and the benefit?
Yeah, I wish I had room to put it on the poster. There's a lot of data.
There is a backside.
Oh yeah, I should have flipped it over. So we had help from Mike Steele. Thank you, Mike Steele. And he had helped us analyze got the fatty acid profile in the colostrum. So we had from C4 to C24 one double bond. And we saw a lot of the effect of DCAD, so the -80 lowering a lot of our longer chain fatty acids.
Okay.
So a lot of the C18 and C20s.
Or more essential, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
seems to be that way. Yeah.
So there's not a lot of work with that and how those fatty acids are impacting the calf. Hopefully someone can look at that. Maybe Guelph is going to soon, but we really don't know, is it good, okay, or bad that they're lowered. But we did see the DCAD really primarily a lot of significance there in lowering these fatty acids.
Nice. Yeah. I do remember the trials from Dr. Staple from University of Florida, that he got really nice results supplementing essential fatty acids in baby calves. So
yes.
Really nice results.
Yeah. This has been very interesting. I think, Marcos, I think we could do a full episode on this.
Yes.
But, but we are going to have to wrap this one up. When do you start your career over there at Rutgers?
Fingers crossed for September 1.
September 1?
Yes.
All right. Well, I will be there on November 4th tailgating.
Okay.
There's an Ohio State-Rutgers game that I will be attending, so if you want to come on out, you're invited.
All right,
so,
thank you.
Anyway, all right. Listen, thank you for joining us today. This
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tonight's last call question is brought to you by NiaSure Precision Release Niacin. Niacin is a proven vasodilator for heat stress reduction and a powerful antilipolytic agent for lowering high blood NEFA in transition cows. Protected with Balchem's proprietary encapsulation technology, you can be sure it is being delivered where and when your cows need it. Learn more at balchem.com/NiaSure.
Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Vinicius Machado from Texas Tech. My co-hosts, I got two of them. Vinicius, we usually just go with one. This is so important. You're so impressive that we had to have two. So we're going with Dr. Jeff Elliott and Dr. Pete Morrow. They're both technical service representatives from Balchem. Vinicius, would you mind just giving me kind of a little bit of background on yourself? What's your pedigree in terms of education and kind of your path to where you are today?
All right, so I'm originally from Brazil, and I got my degree in veterinary medicine in the Federal University of Goiás. That was 2008, right around when I came to the U.S. I worked under the supervision of Dr. Rodrigo Bicalho at Cornell University, got my PhD there in 2015, and then did 2 years of dairy medicine residency there on an ambulatory setting. And once I finished that in 2017, I went to Texas Tech to get a assistant professor position there, and I've been there since then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very well. So now I was looking at the title of your presentation, which was Management of Beef on Dairy Calves. Should we raise them differently? And so that's interesting. Can you give me a little bit of an idea of should we raise them differently?
And that's kind of like, once I was like preparing for the presentation, I was like, oh, that was a mistake to give that type of title, because once you go to a presentation where you have like a question in the title,
yeah,
you assume that the presenter is going to give you the answer, or at least like some good ideas about the answer. And then really I was like, oh, I don't have answers, like, to be honest. Like,
isn't that typical research? You come back with more answers than questions than answers.
Yeah, but you still expect to have some answers out of it. But I think we're such in the initial stage, at least on the research side, like to learn how these calves are, because before you change managements, like you actually have to understand what are the goals, right, what are the goals of raising these calves. And the co-author of the abstract and my colleague collaborator at Texas Tech, Mike Ballou, I talked a lot with him about this kind of things, and like calf management is not really my bread and butter. I work more on the reproductive sides, but Mike works a lot with calves, and talking to him, and we seem to understand that the goal of raising beef on dairy calves, it's a lot more short term than like raising replacement heifers. Because when you're raising replacement heifers, you're thinking about like how they're going to do when they reach lactation. With these beef on dairy calves, all you want to do is to get them on the right weight at the right age so you can sell them, right? So the owner of the calves, like, they don't retain ownership until they go to the feedlot, or when they get to the feedlot. So there's really this disconnect on what can we do better or differently during the even like pre-weaning period, that you have so many early life experiences that can impact their performance when they're mature, at least in terms of dairy cows. And we have no idea how that's impacting their performance in the feedlot later on. And then, like, when you think about health issues, especially related to liver abscesses, which seems to be a really big concern, I guess, of the industry right now. That's some of the, during my presentation, I explore some of those possibilities, or some of those things that happen differently in the calf range that it's not happening, for example, on a cow-calf operation.
Yeah. I definitely want to come back to the liver abscesses later, but first, since the dairy farmers are not retaining ownership, are they not doing things, maybe from colostrum management or just when that calf is born, that's affecting that calf when she hits that beef operation?
Yeah, I think historically, I would say, I don't want to use this word, like, don't get me wrong, but like, let's say that the dairy farmer used to neglect the bull calves, right? I think historically that was the trend now, I think things had improved a lot more. And to be honest, like you go to dairies, and the cows that are bred with a beef semen, they are marked because now like the dairy farmers are like paying a lot more attention to those calves, and they actually, I think they're doing as good with those beef calves as they're doing with their like heifer calves. So I don't think that's necessarily a concern. But again, like they sell them to a calf raising facility usually. Like you still see some owners, like especially larger farms, retaining ownership of those beef and dairy calves. But usually they just sell to a calf ranch. And the calf ranch, really what they want to do is just like get those calves to the right weight, the cheapest way possible, which does not necessarily that is the bad way of doing things, but really like I don't know if we're optimizing or if we really understand what are the things that we can do differently so we can have those calves perform better in later on when they go to the feedlot.
Do you think there's any opportunity for these dairies to hang on to the calf, maybe through weaning? And I don't know if you've looked at the finances, but could they get more for those calves? Because if they haven't transported them, they know they've got good colostrum into them. Is there an advantage to doing that? Or
I wonder. I really don't know if that would be something they would be, because like from what I know, most people they just run out of space in their dairies. I think they would have to put up a lot of like infrastructure to hold like more of those calves. I've seen, like I was in a dairy the other day that the guy just built a bunch of like group pens. So instead of having individual hutches, which is what he has been doing for his heifer calves, he just built up like, he has like those super hutches and have group pens of like, I think it was like 5 or 6 calves per pen. And that's like a little less costly, and he's holding for on those calves. And I think he's actually holding until selling to a feedlot. I don't think it's just through weaning. I think he holds until like the calves is about like, I don't know, like 6 months of age, and then sells to a feedlot.
In the traditional beef industry, age and source verification has become very important. Do you see that coming as a possibility for these dairy calves?
What do you mean by that? Like
where they'd be born, and you know, how old they are versus you know, just a guessed birth date.
Well, I think this is like, I feel that like if we use the word traceability, I guess, I think that's way easier to do that in the dairy farm than in the beef, right? Because on the dairy, we just collect data all the time. Like in the dairy farm, like there's data collected on, like in some dairies they even do like what was the total serum protein of that calf, all the way through all health related events. Some farms they collect like birth weight, weaning weight, so they know like what was the average daily gain different times of the life cycle of the calf. So there's so much data, and I think that's one of the big advantages of the beef and dairy calves versus the traditional beef animals, is just the traceability. At least on data, it's very strong on the dairy side and not so much on beef. So what I like to say is that like we have to find a way that we can not correlate, but like link all the information that we have during that like calfhood part of the life cycle with the performance later on in the feedlot. Because the feedlot also collects a lot of data, but I don't think they collect, and it's just hard to collect data like on individual animals just because they're all in group pens. Like you might have like some health related events, but not so much on like feed intake or individual weights, right? But once that's probably how research should go towards that path, that we can understand what are if the performance during early life and health events and so on is associated with the performance later in life. And so if so, like how can we change to optimize the production of those animals?
So we could use the abundant data available, and in the case of dairy, they would even know the sire. They'd have sire information, which would be pretty unique.
Absolutely.
Use that to create a more valuable product even if it's just to the feedlots, or if they could retain ownership, possibly the end product.
And again, like I feel that like it's understanding what is being valued, right? Like if I'm a dairy farmer, right? Like my priority is to milk cows, to make those cows get bred or get pregnant on time, get good milk production, and then there, or at least in the past, like I want to say like maybe 5 years, you have this opportunity with those beef on dairy calves that they can get like a better price for those 1-day-old calves. And that's kind of, and that's the value they're getting. Like if they're gonna get any more value on all the data they are collecting, I really don't know if the beef part of this cycle is really interested in that. And that's where I was like, they're probably not interested because they don't understand the value. And I think only through research that we can really say like, all right, so these calves here, they don't have like, let's say they double their, and that's like a benchmark that we use for replacement heifers. Oh, we have to double their birth weight by weaning, right? Is that really relevant for beef on dairy calves? If it is, like I think then we can market those animals a little better, and maybe like holding them like until they're weaned might be something that's going to be of economical advantage for the dairy farmer as well.
Almost like a certified preconditioning program.
I guess that would be like the way to go, right? Because right now, like we really don't know what to value because we don't understand what's important.
Yeah. Vinicius, one last question before we go. You talked about liver abscesses, and of course we're kind of in that business. Are you finding the liver abscesses, is it greater in these beef on dairy animals versus regular beef?
That's my understanding, that those beef on dairy calves, they have a higher prevalence of liver abscesses at slaughter, and
any thoughts
greater
on why that
is?
is?
So it's greater than just Holstein steers, for example, and greater than traditional beef, right? So those purebred, let's say Angus just for the purpose of this. So, and we really don't understand exactly where that's coming from. So it became like a game of like, oh, let's blame the calf ranches because they're raising. Because if you compare the differences, there are so many differences. So those calves are transported early in life. They are usually on a restricted liquid feed diet, right? So they're not drinking milk as much as they could if they were just with their dams, right? Those calves are weaned, or at least they stop receiving milk about like, let's say 60 days of age. Some people even do like 45 days of feeding milk. And if you compare that again, like to the traditional beef system, they stay with their dams for like the first 6 months, and they're eating pasture, while those calves and like those beef on dairy calves, they're eating calf starter as a solid feed, and they're eating more calf starter than Holstein calves, and earlier too. So they're eating a lot more of that. And a calf starter, like I'm not a nutritionist, so don't get too hard on me on this. But my understanding, like the calf starter is like pretty comparable to a finishing diet in terms of energy. So I think a lot of people just think that we're preconditioning those calves to develop ruminoacidosis when they get to the feedlot, and because like, oh, if they get, and we know ruminoacidosis is a risk factor for liver abscesses. But again, like, we don't know any of that. Could it be genetics? It can be that too. So we're still like trying to figure out and understand what's making that be such a problem. But again, I was talking to a professor. He was at UC Davis, so a lot of his current data is from there, like Pedro Carvalho, and he's now in CSU, Colorado State. He's more of a beef guy, and he is doing some work with beef on dairy animals as well. And while we hear about like, oh, 60% of some 50% of beef on dairy animals are having like liver abscesses, his incidence was like 2%, 1% on beef on dairy. So it seems to have like some regional differences too that we really don't understand where that's coming from. We know that the feeding behavior of those beef on dairy animals, at least compared to Holstein steers, it's very different. So they drink more, like during the pre-weaning period, they drink more milk, they grow more. I'm not sure if they're growing more only because they drink more milk. I think they also like are eating more calf starter, and that's just based on what we hear. But we just did a study, and those were weaned animals, and only 10 animals per group, and we were not even like interested in comparing those. There were just like 2 different studies. One was with beef on dairy I was gonna call it steers because they're a little older, like 4 months of age, and we had some Holstein steers as well. And we were like, the study was we were testing some different diets on development of liver abscesses, and it was with a model it's a challenge model for the induction of liver abscesses. The beef on dairy calves had 80% liver abscesses by the end of the study. The Holstein steers, only 30%. And they were on the same diet. We knew that then the data showed us that those beef on dairy steers were eating a lot more dry matter than the Holstein steers. And because the challenge model, you have like different cycles of like changing from basal diet to acidotic diet, and then basal diet again. You see that in the first change from basal to acidotic diet, both groups of animals, they decrease dry matter intake, and then they recover. And then once the diet was changing again, only the Holstein steers were dropping dry matter. The beef on dairy steers kept eating, and they never dropped again until they were orally inoculated with bacteria. So I think they're just like, it's just I'm not gonna say like completely different animal, but they have different behaviors.
There's definitely some unknowns.
Yeah, and
this.
we are again like we're pretty much like managing them the same way.
Yeah.
And I think we should manage them differently, but I don't know exactly how.
Well, I'm sure you're going to figure it out one day, and
I guess.
very important subject, and obviously more to know. Benicius, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been very interesting, and it's a great one to end the week on. Right. This is the last one this week. It's been a successful week, right? We've heard some great scientists. We heard from some great science, great scientists, great students. It's just been an amazing week. Want to thank our loyal listeners for coming along with us this week on our journey. Hope you learned something, hope you had some fun, and hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.